Take 9 of A Year of Cinema is from 1973, The Day of the Jackal, directed by Fred Zinnemann, from the alternative history novel by Frederick Forsyth. Although it is not a docudrama and is filmed in color, it employs documentary techniques and can be regarded as a kind of sequel to last week's film, The Battle of Algiers. It shares an actor from that film, Jean Martin. In Algiers, Martin plays the paratrooper colonel who directs the torture that breaks the general strike of 1957. In Jackal, he plays an ex-legionnaire who is tortured to death and whose interrogation divulges the pseudonym which gives the later film its title. Charles de Gaulle returned to power in 1958. After it became clear he intended to give the Arab Algerians their independence, the Organisation Armée Secrète was formed in reaction, and civil war broke out in the French army. In April 1961, the OAS seized Algiers, and then moved to seize the mainland. You can read why it failed, it was a damn close-run thing, in Edward Luttwak's fine study Coup d'État, A Practical Handbook. The OAS then mounted a terror campaign and attempted several times to assassinate de Gaulle. The Day of the Jackal begins with a reconstruction of the 1962 attempt, directed by Colonel Jean-Bastien Thierry. It is difficult to watch this without concluding that de Gaulle was under divine protection. 14 rounds hit the president's Citroën. One missed his head by an inch. The colonel was sentenced to death by firing squad. De Gaulle refused to intervene, explaining, "The French need martyrs." The colonel refused a blindfold and died clutching his rosary. Men were made of sterner stuff in those days. What survives of the OAS leadership in exile in Austria determines that only a hitman could now possibly kill de Gaulle. One is selected and interviewed. He accepts the assignment. His fee is 500,000 American dollars, half in advance, half on completion. This doesn't sound like much today. Its 2015 equivalent would be about $10 million. Still, quite a bargain. As the Jackal says, considering you expect to get France in return, I'd have thought it a reasonable price. This is just about all the exposition we get in The Day of the Jackal. We learn no biographical data about the killer, not his history, nationality, or even his name. Only one rumor that he had previously assassinated Trujillo, dictator of the Dominican Republic. The remaining 2 hours of this film is showing, not saying, showing all a man needs to do in order to murder a head of state and escape alive, and all that Britain and France can do to stop him. Those who have not seen this film and who know a little about history will object that since we know de Gaulle was not assassinated, there is little suspense that can be extracted from this premise. Bryan Singer faced the same problem in Valkyrie, his dramatization of the July 20th plot against Hitler. He failed this challenge, whereas in Jackal, the audience assumes the impossible right to the very end. Why? Mostly because Zinnemann was a great director while Singer is not, and Singer's casting is disastrous. Tom Cruise, as always, gives a valiant effort, but impersonating a German aristocrat was simply not in his wheelhouse. Zinnemann cleverly assembled a cast of actors from the stage and television, and there are delightful cameos from the great Cyril Cusack as a professorial gunsmith, and Ronald Pickup as a louche and greedy forger. Like the two I have just mentioned, most of the actors were then little known to moviegoers, especially American moviegoers, and most remained so. A few later became well known: Derek Jacobi, Michael Lonsdale, Edward Fox. Fox plays the Jackal, and this is the role of a lifetime. He is trim, dapper, posh, possessed of cruel good looks, and a true master of disguise. He is not afraid to get his hands dirty in every respect, and is thus a formidable seducer of both women and men. Despite being a man who murders for money, his intelligence, courage, and indefatigability compel admiration. Above all, however, he is essentially anonymous. There is never anything quite in excess about him. Again, the cat-and-mouse cliché comes to mind. Here the Jackal is an invisible feline pursued by many thousands of mice. For the Jackal is a paean to the much-derided institution of the bureaucracy. The civil servants in this film, British and French, earn their pay and more. The Jackal was filmed just over 40 years ago and depicts a world of just over 50 years ago. It is a vanished world of serious white men in London, Vienna, Rome, Nice, and Paris, who filter every breath through unfiltered cigarettes. And oh, what a world we lost when we forswore nicotine, the life-giving nightshade that concentrates the mind and banishes fatigue. And say what you will about white men and cigarettes, but they get the job done. Whether it is beating Hitler, putting men on the moon, or, in the Jackal, finding a poisonous needle in a haystack. Despite the above, the Jackal does feature two prominent female roles. That they are both redheads of exquisite beauty is a considerable bonus, as is the music, or lack thereof, composed by Georges Delerue. There is no score to speak of in this film, only ersatz diegetic music, radio piffle, military marches, etc., and so we are never instructed how to feel, and none of the film's many surprises are telegraphed. This is not the only or even the most important example of Zinnemann's economy. For much of the Jackal, he eschews the use of dialogue, and it is almost entirely absent in the last 15 minutes, one of the most exciting quarter hours ever captured on film. Fred Zinnemann was one of the many Central European Jews who made their way to Hollywood after Hitler's rise. He repaid his refuge with such works as High Noon, From Here to Eternity, Oklahoma, The Nun's Story, and A Man for All Seasons. He won Best Director at the Academy Awards twice, and 19 actors he directed were nominated for Oscars. Sadly, Hollywood repaid Zinnemann with indifference. Like his fellow refugee Billy Wilder, Zinnemann was tossed on the scrap heap. There is a legendary story about him, which he always denied, that sums up his profession's lack of respect for age and experience. It's said that in the 1970s, Zinnemann met with a tyro producer who asked him to say a little about himself. Zinnemann's reply was, "You first." Sadly, Hollywood's scandalous mistreatment of Zinnemann continues. Only 3 of his films are available on Blu-ray, and the transfer of his most famous film, High Noon, was botched. Incredibly, The Day of the Jackal is available only on a non-anamorphic, letterboxed, DVD from Universal. A high-definition transfer has been shown on television, and we can only hope that this film will soon be available in a form that respects its greatness. Next week, week 10 of A Year in Cinema, we remain in France, and I shall praise Bob le Flambeur, Bob the Gambler, by Jean-Pierre Melville.